forget to hit the button. All right, John, I've got noon, so whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to call the meeting to order. Mary Ellen's running just a couple minutes late, but she will be joining us shortly. So while we wait for her, I think we can, I know Joanne sent out the minutes from the January 16th meeting. So if people had a chance to review those, we could take a motion to approve.
John, can we go through the roll call first, please? Do you want me to read those names?
Sure, yeah.
I've got them in front of me, so it might be easier. All right, so when I say your name, please just confirm that you're present. So John Murray,
Yes, yep.
Mary Ellen Brett, Christopher Cooney, Deb Petty, Forrest Linwall, Frank Lyman, Jason Hunter,
Here.
Jay Patakis, Jennifer Burke. Jennifer did send her apologies. She's having internet issues today. Lee Hartman, Marlene Amity, Mary Ellen DeFrayis, Michael Lambert, Pamela McCarthy, Pelej Marcelin, Rob May,
Here.
Robert Downey, Rose Paquette, Sean Boucher, Sheila Sullivan Jardim, Stephanie Danielson,
Present.
Tracy Costa, and Valerie Massard. Okay, if I haven't called your name, I'm just going to read through the attendees list just to note for the record who else is present. Dottie Fulginetti, sorry, Dottie. Dottie Fulginetti from OCPC.
Yes, and Joanne,
Yeah.
Sheila logged in while you were talking. She didn't respond, but I see her there.
Okay,
Good
super.
morning.
Hi, Sheila.
Thank you, Dottie. Good morning, Joanne.
I see Mary Waldron's on.
Good morning, afternoon, everyone. It's still morning here in Iowa, Illinois.
Sean Bailey from OCPC.
Present.
Charles Kilmer from OCPC.
Hi, everybody.
Ray Guarino from OCPC.
Present.
I see Gregory Enos from the town of Avon has joined us. Hi, Greg.
Hello.
And is there anybody on the call that I've missed? Great. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, John. Go ahead.
Great, thank you. So the minutes had been sent out from the January 16th meeting. Hopefully people had a chance to review those. If there's any discussion on the minutes before we make a motion to approve. If not, we'll take a motion to approve the minutes.
Rob May
Make a
moves.
motion to accept the minutes.
Great, is there a second?
Rob May seconds.
Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, minutes are approved. The second item on the agenda, or the third item actually, is the discussion of the operating principles for the committee. And Joanne, I'll turn it over to you for that.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to make an attempt to share my screen here, and hopefully it
I
goes
think
off
it's
well.
already shared.
I'm sorry, with the new document, the operating principles. So let me just stop and start again. Oops. All right, you should now see the operating principles. Is that right? Great. All right, so at our last CEDS committee meeting, there were several members who expressed an interest in the committee becoming more of a working group. And as such, both in terms of recruiting new members, and there are some gaps in the committee at the moment, as well as helping to facilitate the group towards more of a working group. Several people, including OCPC staff, and we talked to John and Mary Ellen about this as well. We thought it would be a good idea to have operating principles for the committee. We can call them something else if people are more comfortable with that, bylaws or something else. But the idea behind this is that first, it will just formalize the process and the membership and how the committee moves logistically into the future. That's especially helpful when OCPC staff change as well too. So for example, from the transition from Bruce to myself, a document like this would have been helpful. And also I think it's a really good document to help recruit members as well. So this will describe what the committee is all about, what the commitment would be, what the representation should be. If we want to be specific about that, we don't have to. So I think it's a good general document to have. And the other committees at OCPC, such as the Metropolitan Planning Organization and the Joint Transportation Committee, also do have similar documents. I think in those cases, they call them bylaws. Charlie, is that right? Do you guys call them bylaws for both?
Yes, for the Joint Transportation Committee, they're referred to as bylaws, and for the MPO itself, it's a memorandum of understanding between the signatories.
Great, thank you, Charlie. The one thing that's a little bit confusing, or at least it was to me in moving into this role, and I'm not sure how many committee members are aware of this, but Old Colony Planning Council, the region, is designated as an economic development district by the Economic Development Agency. And as part of that designation, OCPC's council, our board, if you will, they are actually the governing board for the Economic Development District. So the ultimate sign off on, for example, the 5-year comprehensive economic development strategy, the official sign off and stamp and seal of approval is the council. So this committee, the Comprehensive Economic Strategy Committee, is more of an advisory body to the council. So that distinction is kind of important to keep in mind as well too, as we discuss these. Is there anybody that didn't receive the paper? If not, it is, I believe, linked on our website. If you go to our calendar on our website, you can download it there. So I think I'd like to first open it up to any general comments to see if anybody's had a chance to review this and what they think about the idea of having operating principles in general, if it's worth having. And then maybe we can go through this section by section, and I'll pull out some of the key points that we should talk about. The plan going forward is, if this committee agrees that operating principles are good to have, then our next general meeting in April, February, March, yes, in April, I would take the comments from today's meeting and actually draft them up into a formal operating principles document, which we can then further discuss at that meeting and or vote on it if we feel like we're ready to. So first, does anybody have any general thoughts or ideas, suggestions?
I mean, I think operating principles make sense.
Thank you, Stephanie. Anybody else? Just
I haven't had a chance to look through them, but.
okay.
It's Rob. I don't have a problem with it.
Okay.
That sounds like a ringing endorsement.
Sounds good. All right, so let's dive into the details. So this first section is pretty straightforward. So this is pulled from the regulations for the Economic Development Agency and the purposes of an economic development district. This second paragraph is literally copy and pasted. So that really isn't much to discuss there. And the specifics of what a CEDS committee should do is a little bit vague when it comes to EDA language. So we know that these first 3 bullet points are what's required of a CEDS committee. So the first is to guide OCPC staff in the development and updating of the regional comprehensive economic development strategy, which is normally on a 5-year cycle. To contribute to CEDS progress reporting to the EDA, the OCPC Council, and stakeholders. So as Dottie talked about at our last meeting, it's important for us to make sure that we're always referring back to the CEDS document and keeping track of what's going on in all of our communities so that we can report all that back to the EDA. And most importantly, make those connections between what's in the strategy and any grant applications that communities might be applying for, because the EDA always looks for that connection. And then the third bullet is to work towards the implementations of goals and objectives set out in CEDS, as I've just mentioned. These last 3 bullets are they're not necessarily required by the EDA, but I do think that's the way that the committee was moving in the past, is my impression, and would like to move forward into the future. So as a committee, the purpose would also be to encourage regional collaboration, to disseminate economic development related information and resources, and also to build capacity to achieve a more resilient and equitable economy at the regional and municipal levels. And for example, an example of a way to build capacity would be by holding educational webinars, but there are lots of other ways to do that. Are there any thoughts on whether these 3 bullet points down at the bottom are appropriate or inappropriate? Is there anything we'd like to add or delete, or do we feel comfortable with those?
Joanne,
Mhm.
I'm wondering if you could, if you have any information on how other regional planning agencies, the CEDS, function.
Yeah, so I did do a look through all of the different regional planning agencies. Every single one of them does it differently. Again, because there isn't really any box that the EDA requires a committee to be placed into. So for example, SERPED, the Southeast region, they normally hold committee meetings. I don't know the frequency, I think it's at least quarterly. And they generally use the meetings as an opportunity to do presentations. So they'll have guest speakers come in and speak on a variety of topics, which might be like a regional project that's happened or a new grant opportunity or something like that. The Metropolitan Area Planning Council, so the Greater Boston Regional Planning Agency, their CEDS committee is actually their executive committee. So they meet, I don't know how regularly their executive committee meets, but they conduct all their CEDS business through their executive committee. And I haven't reached out to them, and there's not too much information on their website, but from what I was able to gather on their website, I think that the executive committee in their role as the CEDS committee very much focuses on the strategy document. So the progress reporting and the approval of that document, it's not really used as a regional vehicle for collaboration or anything like that. The other one that's an interesting example, and that's kind of what some of these operating principles have been inspired by, is FERCOG, which is I think it's the Franklin Regional Council of Governments. So that regional planning agency in, I think it's Central or Western Mass, they used to have a separate economic development district governing board, and then a CEDS committee under that. And both of those were separate from their executive committee as an RPA. But they merged that economic development district governing board into the CEDS committee. So now that CEDS committee meets regularly. I don't know at what frequency, but they do a lot of what we're kind of proposing here. So they do try and facilitate the regional collaboration through their CEDS committee, and also do the information exchange and resources. So they're all very different. My intention after today is to reach out to each of the leads for the CEDS committees and the different RPAs, and actually see if they've got operating principles or more detail about how their committees work. But the impression I get is that some of them are very informal and others are very formal as part of whatever the RPA process is.
Great, thank you.
Joanne, if I could,
Yeah.
I've got some sweeper coming in my back here, but I mean, the whole idea from my perspective, serving both as a co-chair from the past, and then also in my role right now as executive director, I do think this fashion in terms of having the Stephanie Danielsons and the John Murrays and, you know, this nice collaboration of their members, like we have Val on this call, who is our member, but we also have the town administrator. So that mixture of discussions about economic development, because it really is going to be from the ground up. I know and love our executive committee. They're very thoughtful and very caring as well, but they're also stretched so thin on so many other things. So having this focus and having it be cultivated from this level, you know, I'm looking at, you know, you have Sheila and you have Rob May, and like that really, that piece is so important. So the dialogue is probably the most critical piece, that we want to be able to have our fingers on the pulse. And obviously, if there are things that need attention and if we need to redirect our strategy from the executive committee level of the council, then that's what we should do. But it really needs to be based upon data and information, as instead of saying, yeah, we feel this way. So I appreciate the work that you've done in explaining to the members, you know, the work that you've done and the work that you're going to do, and just to see if what other, how other CEDS are working. I just think, right, we've got people with busy lives, and including the staff, but we want to be able to have that mutually beneficial benefit for, you know, whether it's a state agency or whether it's an economic development director from a community. So thank you.
Does anybody else have any thoughts on the purpose section? No.
I was kind of fine with the purpose section. I do believe, like Mary, that there's a great opportunity for cross collaboration and capacity building, and it needs to be a you know, really wide focused look at what's going on in our district. I'm done eating.
Thank you, Rob.
on camera.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, so now we're going to jump into the nitty gritty of this. Again, the EDA doesn't really give much direction at all on what a CEDS committee composition should be like. So the model that I've based ours off of is sort of historically how my understanding of the CEDS committee is. And please, for those of you that have been here longer than I have, do let me know if I'm incorrect. And also FERCog's model for their committee. So the first big question is, who can join? I think the easiest way to do this is anybody who lives or works in the region who has a professional interest. And we leave it vague, and the council will go on to how members are selected in a bit. But the vetting process will just make a determination whether or not somebody's a suitable person for the committee. Does anybody feel like we need to be more specific or more stringent on that? Or does the vague language of living and or working in the region with a professional interest sound okay? Good.
Yeah, I think
Well-
that sounds fine.
Rob, was that you?
I-
Were you gonna say? Mhm.
Yeah, that's me coming in. The vagueness is appropriate if we couch it in some specific language. And I think that gets down to like letter D under 2. My thought is, and I did send you back, I just sent you and Dottie those notes. Just like other entities at OCPC, this is quasi-governmental, that there are specific, and I'll defer to Charlie on this, but I think the JTC has spots for each municipality. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And I thought a similar structure and a two-tiered level, that there are voting members or members that are appointed by either their mayor or the chief elected official or town manager. And then there are other members who are like Massasoit and Mass Hires and OC and Metro South Chamber, but we really are representing the local governments in our district to Washington. And for the most part, the funding doesn't always come down to local governments, but they're more likely to be ones who apply. And I would think that as elected officials, they have a little bit more responsibility to appoint a representative, and hopefully that representative shows up, but is not exclusively to, oh, whoever wants to be on the board. And then further down in D, you say it's proposed that Old Colony follow this model, and then you've divvied up. Well, I don't know who proposed that, but I think it should be open, first to appointed members from each of the municipalities, and then associate members, or whatever you would like to call them, of the other players in economic development.
So I have
Thank you,
a thought on that. I think that makes a lot of sense, Rob. But if you're looking at it that the council is people that are appointed from the municipalities, you have that representation there, and this is an advisory committee to the council. I think that it might be hard to get members from each of the communities, and, specifically because some communities are very, very, very deep into economic development, like Brockton. And then there's some other communities that really don't, they're not at that level, I guess. So I think that I like the approach of making sure that there's invitations extended to some of the organizations that advance economic development in the region as well. And that's not saying that municipalities can't or shouldn't attend or want to be on there, but I just think if we hold those spots asking for the 17 communities to appoint someone, there's going to be a lot of vacant seats.
And I'll just chime in here too as well to say, sorry, I'll pass it to you and Stephanie in a second. So the EDA requires that the CEDS committee is representative of the economic interests of the region. So we have to be very intentional about having enough seats on the committee, voting seats on the committee, to make sure that we represent, whether that's academic institutions or, the entrepreneurship community somehow, businesses of color. I mean, there are lots of different economic players, and we just have to make sure that it represents the whole package in the region and not just the municipalities, because that's something the EDA is very specific about, actually. Stephanie, you were going to say something?
It's irrelevant right now.
Okay. Does anybody else have any? So, all right, so let me run through this again, and then we'll come back because we jumped a little bit ahead. So as Dottie said, the OCPC Council is the governing board of the CEDS committee. So technically we do have representation from all the communities when we do. Oh, yep, go ahead, Rob.
Quick question. Again, help me clarify, who is the OCPC Council?
Okay, so Old Colony Planning Council has the council, which is the governing board of OCPC.
Is
So
that
that's
different from the MPO?
Yes. This is all very confusing. Yes. So think of, I know we're not, but think of OCPC as a traditional nonprofit. The council is our nonprofit governing board. So there is a representative from each of the municipalities in the region on that council and an alternate as well. So they run OCPC on like a monthly basis. And Mary, maybe you could, Mary, you still on?
I am.
Yeah,
I
do you
am.
want to chime in and explain a little bit more? And then maybe Charlie about the MPO?
Yep, I can. And part of it is because we just recently revised our bylaws as well. So you explained it correctly, Joanne. Is the there's a delegate and an alternate from each of the 17 communities. Plus there's an at-large that's supposed to be representative of the Black and Brown community at large. But so that is formulated, that's by an act of the legislature and the an enabling legislation. So that piece is what runs us and how we meet internally. I mean, there are some regional planning agencies that just have their executive committee meet on a monthly basis. And then the council, that's the 17 plus members, meet on a quarterly basis. We decide that we are all going to meet on a monthly basis as the council. So the terminology, I know in terms of, it's like a board of directors, if you will, another way of looking at it. And then there's subcommittees that are delegated to work on things as we move along the way. So whether it's finance. So is that helpful does that get us to where we need to?
I would just add, Mary, that the council votes on the budget and they look at the financials of the organization and the funding sources and things like that. And they hire the executive director, and then the executive director manages the staff on the day-to-day basis.
Right. Thank you, Dottie.
And the MPO is almost like a separate organization within OCPC. And some members overlap. So we have some that might be on the council who might also be on the MPO, but not necessarily. Charlie, can you expand a little bit on that to give everybody a bit of the background?
Yes, thank you, Joanne. So the MPO is actually external to OCPC. OCPC is one of the 8 signatories on the MPO itself. So the 8 signatories on the MPO, it's the Secretary of Transportation, Jamie Tesler, the Highway Administrator of MassDOT, the Administrator of Brockton Area Transit. City of Brockton has a permanent local seat. The Town of Plymouth has a permanent local seat. OCPC has one seat. And then we have 2 locally elected communities. Currently it's served by West Bridgewater and the other is Whitman. The MPO itself is charged with developing a transportation improvement program, a public participation plan, a 20-year long-range plan, and it functions externally to OCPC. OCPC does weigh in on all of these documents before it gets to the MPO board, but it functions as a separate board. And an advisory group to the MPO and to the OCPC is the Joint Transportation Committee. So that they advise on policy and project selection.
Thanks, Charlie.
There'll be a quiz for everybody after all of this is done, but it's complicated, but it's not complicated if you follow the money and you follow the authorization of things, so whether it's federal or state. So thank you.
So I just have a point of clarification. Charlie, is the MPO primarily focused on transportation and transportation projects?
I would say that's accurate, yes.
So that's not a yes, but it's accurate.
Well, to your point, it's not just the tip, it's a 5-year document of projects such as like in Easton, the Depot Street project was a $10 million project that was advertised and going to construction this spring. But to a larger point, one of the products of the MPO is the long range plan, and beyond project that includes demographic analysis, safety analysis, and the
But
like.
all
So,
related to transportation?
yeah, I mean, it comes down to the question of what comes first. Is it the transportation or the land use? And that's what
Okay.
the long-range plan attempts to articulate as a 20-year needs assessment of the region in terms of people and their related mobility. And it touches on economic development, workforce development, and how do you get people to the jobs and what type of infrastructure do you need to facilitate efficient
Okay,
movement of freight and goods. And yep.
so would the CEDS plan inform that long-range plan?
Yes.
Okay.
And vice versa as well. Okay.
Mhm.
So back to Rob's point, I think in my very limited experience of the CEDS committee, I think the connection between the CEDS committee and the OCPC council has been a little bit weak. And I think what needs to happen going forward is strengthening that relationship for exactly why the reason you've said, Rob, is that we already have a council that represents all of our communities, literally every single municipality in the district, and utilizing them,
Okay.
not just to approve the CEDS document, but actually to bring in that feedback and participate in the collaboration, I think is going to be key to moving this forward as well. And I've started talking to Mary about how we can maybe do that. And one of the ways for sure is just to start reporting to them on a regular basis as to the progress of the CEDS committee. And we haven't really talked further than that. I don't know, Mary, if you have any additional thoughts on that right now?
I don't, but I think that's why this very conversation, like I'm just ready to text you to say, like, this is a conversation that we need to have to strengthen, our region is often jumped over sometimes, and I can't say that we individually are responsible, but we certainly through this committee want to make sure that we have a voice that is seen as resourceful, engaged. Hey, what's going on in the communities, or what's going on between these two communities? We should have our pulse, particularly as it relates to economic development, but with workforce and transportation, because they're all intertangled. So my personal thinking is that this ongoing, looking what best practices are out there, how are others functioning, but just because it works well and maybe in the Berkshire may not work for us, particularly since I'm looking at the people that are on this committee have joined this for so many years, probably just as long as I've been around. So we want to grow, we want to anyway. So you got my point. At this point I don't have much more, but I really would like to see what are the touch points that we can, and then through whether the process of webinars and discussion, that we continue to keep engaged with each other.
Does anybody else have any thoughts in general on membership, or any questions about that complicated structure between the council and what the MPO is and that sort of stuff?
What is the relationship to the money?
To the money. So the money, the Economic Development Agency administration wants whoever applies to the EDA should be making connections to the CEDS strategy. So that doesn't necessarily mean that a specific project needs to be very specifically written into the CEDS, which it can be, and that is great too. But if, for example, there's a more general purpose of, resilient water infrastructure, for example, and a community proposes a project under that, that link needs to be made very clear. So the EDA does reference the CEDS document for its, as part of its assessment of applications. Dottie, do you want to explain that a little bit more or add anything?
No, I think that you've made a good point. And I think even, though it's not a requirement on the state level, I think that it makes a stronger grant application for state grants if you tie it back to a regional strategy like the CEDS.
Mm-hmm.
If I could jump in, I don't know if this is appropriate at this point, but one of the good God, I'm sorry. One of the things the CEDS informs is when you're submitting a MIPA application for a project.
Mhm.
So if your project is in line with goals and objectives that are set in your CEDS document, one, it makes it easier for the consultant that's preparing your report, but it also furthers support for the project.
That is a very good point.
And so the primary purpose of the CEDS, oh, go ahead, Rob.
No, I was going to jump in, and I'm sorry if I'm speaking out of school or if I'm getting into trouble for this, but I write pretty much the Brockton section of the CEDS plan and any CEDS reports. And I worked with Bruce, and now I'm working with you guys to do that. But you're saying that this committee actually is an advisory committee to this council. And quite frankly, I have no idea who Sydney Morrow or Preston Huckabee are.
Neither
Who are
do
the
I,
Brockton-
Mary.
Who are the Brockton representatives on this council.
But you did know who Bob Moran was. And Bob Moran was the delegate because he attended many of the CEDS meeting as well.
From Power.
So we just had a transition. Sydney Marrow is a woman from Brockton, a resident of Brockton, and Preston Huckabee is an engineer who does live in Brockton, has been the alternate for a number of years. So one of the things that my role is to take the delegates and alternate and connect them with the individual communities and have these discussions with the planner, with the mayor, with others as it relates. So the staff all know that if there is an email that goes out to, say it is to Rob May, they need to have the alternate and the delegate on it so they're aware of the activity, right? We're the staff, we get the paid, so it's a non-paying position, it's a volunteer, kind of like, let's beg you all to come here. But the reality is that someone like Val, who was a planner, who was also serving as delegate, does have a pulse. So my role that for this coming year really is to start taking those delegates and alternate and I'm informing them of who and connecting them with the various sources. So when it's time to vote, they either, number one, hey, Rob, did you see this? So it's not, you should already have known that, but the idea is that dialogue should be happening individually.
So are they voting on what we write since we're advisory to them?
They ultimately need to, like they did last year, there was a resolve to accept. At that point, Bob Moran was still on. So there was a resolve to accept the 3-year CEDS. So, yep, they do vote on the CEDS.
Okay.
Rob, I think you made an excellent point.
I don't disagree. There are those, like, we are not the appointing authority of the delegates and alternate. So in the city of Brockton, it's the mayor with the affirmation of the council, but in the communities, it is the chair of the Board of Selectmen who do the appointment. So it does not have to be a planning board member. It can be a person from the community. It's hard enough to try to get people to attend meetings and things of that nature, but the point is, well taken.
Okay.
It's our, if I could, my last piece is that it's our role for us to educate our board members so that they are making informed decisions. And to encourage the communication between the delegate and or alternate. For like the town of Easton, there's Jean Marie, but she's a delegate. There's no alternate, there's no backup. So one of the things I plan to do is to work with that. Where's that chair of the board in Easton? Got to work with that. But that's what regionalism is all about, right? Is encouraging and making sure that we are encompassing the needs of the various communities. And in this case, the CEDS with economic development and the like.
I'd also just like to add that while we're looking at this from the CEDS perspective, the council is also just revamping their bylaws and organizational structure, because some of that was, for instance, I don't know our delegate. I've met her once. So I didn't know what the role and the relationship was with that. I didn't realize the select board appointed, because there was no terms established. So she was probably appointed before I was on the select board, or it was one of those things that, it's just sometimes appointments come up and we vote to appoint people to committees, and we didn't have a lot of knowledge of it. So I think that that's undergoing the huge transformation that OCPC has been doing in the past year and is set to do this year is another one of those steps. And I think that that's really going to strengthen the relationships from the municipalities and the CEDS committee.
Joanne, my last comment, because I know you want to move on. This is exactly, again, the conversation that we need to strengthen, hearing from both Stephanie and Rob in terms of, okay, so we're going to go through all of this organization, and then what? We're going to send all this information to the council, and are they informed? Are they engaged? So point well taken, and I appreciate that.
So I just want to add to that. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. This is Mary Ellen. So I don't know if it would be helpful to anybody else, but it would certainly be helpful to me to see an org chart of sorts, if you will, for EDA and OCPC and CEDS, and where we fit in to the structure. What's advisory, what's voting, which are appointed, and also the money flow. So that would be super helpful, I think, to informing this discussion and moving it further. I don't know if other folks agree or disagree with that, but.
Yeah, I would call it a relationship chart, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to get hung up on the language, but some kind of, sort of flow, where we fit into the economic development planning infrastructure and structure. And, what boards, committees are appointed and which ones, have voting, and the financial flow, like I said.
Mary, do you want to comment on that? Oh, you're muted.
There, sorry, sun's in my eye, but beach is not. No, I just to comment again to reinforce the fact that we're building that synergy. Dottie alluded to it. There's been a lot of work that we've made inroads on, but there's a lot more that we need to move forward. I'm looking at people like Val, who is on this call today, and as a board member, Lee Hartman has shown up as well. There's been a number, again, building up that relationship, so then it's a smoother system and synergy. And so, while we don't necessarily need to have all of our council members attending the CEDS, having a member and or, as I mentioned earlier with Joanne and I were talking, a report to the council on a more frequent basis about what is going on with the CEDS, who's on there, the delegate. So even this conversation, Joanne, I think I will be meeting tomorrow with Christine Joy, who is the president of the council. And this is what she's looking for. How do we improve that relationship? How do we improve, being in touch with just with those within the economic development realms of each of the individual communities. So that cross check of the, we do have monthly staff reports that staff prepares for the council members. I know I can't go through every single thing. So the CEDS is only one piece of what we do. So, while this part is important, there are other aspects of whether it's a hazard mitigation or whether it's, just even with housing, right? We don't even get a chance to really touch upon housing. So as much as I think this getting to have substantive in terms of the economic part, the economic recovery for our region is really critical. We need to be able to find flexibility to blend along with the other departments so that we continue to, on all fronts be significant. And in this case, because the EDA has under its funding and because they've pretty much identified the criteria, we want to bring that back into place.
Thanks,
So,
Mary.
does that
So I
help?
think, yeah, so I think for the next meeting, so I'm just conscious of the time, it's 12:45 and I don't want to hold everybody over for too long. So I think what I'll do for the next meeting is I'll work with Mary to get you guys the relationship chart and a bit of a description so you can see how all these moving parts fit together. And then in the meantime, if anybody has any further thoughts or notes on this operating principles document, please feel free to call me directly or email me, and we can kind of talk about it one-to-one so that at the next meeting, maybe I can come back with a more structured terms of reference that we can then go through in detail. The two quick things that I just wanted to kind of talk about is we don't technically have terms on this committee at the moment, or at least none that I'm aware of. So think in particular about, what a term should be and whether there should be any term limits. And how many members we have who are voting members would determine our quorum, which could be 50% of the voting membership plus one, or it could be something that we set ourselves. So for example, you could also set a quorum of 6 or 10% of voting membership. So that's just the very detailed stuff to think about for our next meeting. The Economic Development Administration does, I think, require that CEDS meet 4 times a year minimum. So I think after talking to both Mary Ellen and John, we're going to aim to do 6 meetings this year. But in the terms of reference or operating principles, we'd leave it at the minimum, and then you can always do more if you want to. And yeah, so that's kind of it. So I think what I'm proposing is we pause the discussion on this here today. Anybody who's got further thoughts, send them my way, give me a call or an email, and we can go through it in detail. I'll come back at our next meeting in April with a draft of some operating principles, as well as the relationship chart, and we can just continue the discussion then. How does that sound to everybody?
I think whenever you have the relationship chart, it's okay to send that, whenever you
course,
have
yeah.
it, so people can, read it and absorb it and, learn more about the overall structure and where we fit in and the descriptions of the different entities. That would be super helpful. And then we can, just send a reminder to everyone before the next meeting to review it.
Mm-hmm. Super. So Rob, to answer your question from the chat, appointments. So I'm not entirely sure on how appointments were run in the past. The way that we could consider running appointments is that we would have the committee members make recommendations to the chair, or OCPC would make recommendations, OCPC staff would make recommendations to the committee chair. And then John and or Mary Ellen would consider those appointments and forward those on to Mary to bring to the council for final vote and approval. That's one way to do it, but we welcome other suggestions. So Rob, if you've got another suggestion, please let us know. And we can take
me,
that
I've
up.
already got another suggestion.
Good. Let's talk about it more.
No, I'm kidding. I've got an opinion on everything.
I'm going to call you anyway.
I do agree, Rob. Going back quite a few years, because these meetings were held at 3:00 in the afternoon. It was me and 3 other people who were probably over the age of 80, and that's not kidding. And when this got moved to an hour's time with lunch, so yes, Rob, I saw your message about the food is always an incentive. I think this is one of the things that Joanne and the team is trying to do is that look at what incentivizes someone to attend, to be here, to be engaged, to offer suggestions, to really make this into a well-run and well-versed organization. So we're covering housing, we're covering workforce development, we're covering, businesses and entrepreneurs and all the different things that I think that we really need to make sure to sustain our region. So I appreciate this work. And Joanne, congratulations on your first meeting and officially promoted. I know it just went out in our newsletter, so she's been promoted to this position. You guys all knew that anyway. I really think that the dialogue that's occurring today is one that we really need to continue and appreciate your investment. So, I would look to someone like Val, and maybe we can do a little focus group with some of our other folks on our council to see how they can see their role as council members to be participating in this sense.
Sure. Thanks. All right. So with that, John,
I think
if
in
it's
the
all right.
in the interest of time, we want to quickly. We've only got about 10 minutes left, so if you can, Joanne, kind of pivot over to the Economic Development and Recovery webinar series, that would be great.
Super. All right. So I'm going to share my screen again. So in the past, this committee has shared some suggestions and ideas for webinars, economic development related webinars that would be helpful to planners and others in the communities working on development issues. So that's what you see on the right-hand side of the screen here. Actually, let me make it bigger so you can see it all. There you go. So that's what's on the right-hand side of the screen here. And we're proposing to do 5 webinars during the rest of this calendar year. We do have Dr. Mark Melnick from the Donahue Institute already confirmed to do a webinar. At the moment, it's scheduled for March 16. However, we were wondering whether folks in this committee would find it helpful instead to postpone Dr. Melnick to May, because that would mean that he'd have Q1 results on the economy from the first part of this year. And instead in March, do a webinar with the state on the community one-stop for growth. I know that several of you have probably participated in the state webinars that recently happened, but we were thinking that maybe a regional webinar would give people an opportunity to ask more specific questions and just get a little bit more time with the people who are running this program. The expressions of interest for the One Stop for Growth are April 2nd. So the March 16th timing would probably be the best time to do the One Stop for Growth webinar. Does anybody have any thoughts on whether that would be useful, or do you feel like the state's already covered it and we don't need to do it again?
Rob or
Anybody?
Stephanie, I think I would look more to you guys.
I went through the webinar and have a pretty good sense of what the One Stop for Growth is all about and the new approach for funding. I mean, if you had it, I would attend it.
The thing that I think that might be valuable about this also is that, communities that DHCD may not have a strong relationship with would certainly get a little bit of FaceTime with somebody, with the presenter. So I know that Easton has done a really good job and Brockton has done a really good job with those connections. I'm not sure. I think it might be valuable if other communities wanted to join it. I'm not sure that they would, but it would be a good opportunity to get some FaceTime with, one of the leaders of DHCD.
I was going to say I slept through the webinar too.
I did not sleep through it, Rob.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's what I thought you said. I did go back and listen to it again. Oh my God.
I took copious notes.
Oh my God. But it would be kind of interesting to hear what other people are working on.
Yeah,
Because we need to compete regionally. And I know there are some regional issues that both Brockton and Easton need to work on and be in support of each other. So it might be interesting to hear what other, communities out there are working on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one thing, you guys, we've been making calls to all the South region for the one stop, and Val, you're on my list. We need to talk as soon as we can, possibly. Is a lot of the municipalities, like Stephanie and Rob are all over it, but the smaller municipalities, they're kind of lost and they don't really understand how this works. Well, they haven't had the time to go to the seminars, and that's really important because it was kind of an eye opener for me, because you have people that are like, you're like the fifth person who's told me about this, but then you have other municipalities, the smaller ones, that just don't have the time, don't have a grant writer, too overwhelmed. So it might be worth educational wise for some of them to
And I think the two guests we should have as a panelist are Rob and Stephanie. To share best practices. But I do think, I think when Joanne brought this up to me, obviously the timing, and we don't want to be doing this in May when it's all over. We want to the very point also that Jay mentioned, let's flesh out, let's try to lift each other up to see where we are, because if you've got a community next to you who may not have all their ducks in order, and you do, but it's going to somehow affect. So maybe some best practices and things of that nature would be the way to go.
I'd also like to build on what Rob was saying, not just because it's competitive, but because it makes sense. I think about some of the goals that we're trying to achieve in our economic growth areas in Easton and revitalizing them, and the challenges that Brockton's facing. And I really think there could be a lot of synergy between the two communities. And I think there's a real opportunity, and I don't know if the CEDS meeting, the CEDS is a group that we'd work on this, but it is identifying more. I'd like to identify more opportunities to work together on regional solutions, not just singular municipal solutions. And that being said, in looking at, so I'm jumping back a little bit to the composition of the group, the committee, is I think having representation from the municipalities seems to be important to me.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So it sounds like we'll aim to do a Community One Stop for Growth webinar in March, and then we'll pick up with Dr. Mark Melnick in May. I'll email this slide out so you guys can kind of think more on it, and we can get some more of these spots filled up for the rest of the year too. If you guys ever think of a topic that you're kind of questioning or want to know more about, please do send it our way, because one of the big things we do want to do is work a bit more on building capacity in the region, and the webinars are going to be the first way for us to help do that. That's all I've got on the webinar series for now. I think we'll pick this back up at the next meeting as well.
Great, thank you, Joanne. Dottie, you have some updates as well on economic recovery resources and grants?
Sure. So there's been a slew of grant opportunities that have been hitting us. There's small business grants that were administered through the Mass Growth Capital, MGCC, Mass Growth Capital. And those have been like kind of a rolling, the applications have been closed, but they're still continuing to make the awards on a weekly basis. So there's been a number of awards in our region, which is a pretty significant investment. If people want more details on that, reach out to me and I can send that out. The local rapid recovery grant opportunity that came out is for communities to come up with something that they want help with from a consultant, basically to accelerate their recovery locally. There were 4 awards made in our region for communities that will get that help, which are Brockton, Easton, Halifax, and Plymouth. And so that means they're going to be paired with a consultant, and that consultant is going to help them develop the plan. There's no funding attached to executing the plan, but I'm hopeful that the state understands that's necessary and will probably come out with some funding for that afterwards. That's just my thoughts. That's not true. I didn't hear it anywhere, but I can't imagine that they would invest in all this time to come up with a plan if there was no way to facilitate those plans. So congratulations to those 4 communities. There's also a grant opportunity for a local pilot project, which the requirement was that 2 municipalities, at least 2, would work together to come up with something to accelerate economic development. And so I had sent out an email to all of our municipalities with this grant opportunity. And we heard back from Halifax first, which I was really excited about because they're a very small community. And he had heard about the successes that Easton was doing with an Easton Outside campaign. And that's a very hyper local campaign that the business community worked with the Economic Development Council in Easton to come up with signs, banners, social media. In fact, they were featured on local Fox 25 last night. And there you can see that on the Easton Economic Development Facebook page. It's been a really exciting project. So we put it out there, and Easton, Brockton, West Bridgewater, Avon, and Halifax, OCPC applied to be the facilitator of that grant for those communities. And they would be kind of working on what Easton has already shown as a track record of success. Brockton applied for an urban agenda grant, and we assisted with that. Unfortunately, they did not get that award. So still looking for other opportunities. And then there's some new grants that are out there. There's an SBA grant, grant called the Shuttered Venue. I think I put that in the bulletin from last month. There's $500 cultural celebration grants for cultural committees. There was a travel and tourism grant that was due last week. I know that Plymouth worked with neighboring communities to apply for that. The Metro South Chamber had applied for that as well. So there's a lot of stuff going on. It's really hard to keep track of. I've been trying to send it out in updates, but the best place to see that information is on our social media and our newsletter. So if you could spread the word to people that would be interested to sign up to follow us in those manners, you'll get the information hot off the presses when these are available. And then if there's anything specific, we usually try to send those out to town administrators or planners or DPW or whoever the targeted audience of interest would be. So that's my
Got it. Thank you, Di. Thank you, Di. That's awesome. Quick question. The newsletter, is that accessible if people go to the website? I'm just thinking of folks who might not be accessing via social media.
Yeah, there's a sign up right on the homepage of the OCPC website. You'll see it in the right-hand side, I think.
Okay, so do grant opportunities like the ones you just mentioned, Dottie, do those live like sort of live? Do they have a place on the website so that if someone's not getting the news, so they need to sign up for the newsletter?
Yes. When our new website is launched, which we are currently working on, there will be a section for that, but right now it's just via newsletter or social media.
Okay.
And the turnaround on these grants, have been pretty quick on a lot of them. Sometimes there's only a 2-week turnaround on them. So they come and go pretty quickly. And it's like really trying to manage them and keep track of them. You really have to be on the ball. That's why we try to make sure that they get out to the people that really would be interested in them. And that's why this committee is so helpful, because if we know that your community is doing something specific, or even like in our broader work with the communities, if we know that you're trying to work on a trail, like a walking trail or a hiking trail, and we see that grant come in, now we know to get that to you. We have a list of brownfield communities. So when, Mass Development has something about brownfield, we can send that stuff right out to the people that we know are interested.
That's great. Thank you so much. In the interest of time, I'm going to sort of group the next, going to go through the next 3 items pretty quickly. First of all, is there any other business for the folks want to raise or share? And any member updates?
Sorry,
Rob?
I was muted, sorry. There is a NEPA remote site visit on Monday, the 22nd at 1 o'clock to talk about Trout Brook. You all should be on that distribution list. I hope
Excellent.
you all got it.
Thank you, Rob. Just FYI, folks, Massasoit was the recipient of a train grant from the Board of Higher Ed. So there's 18 slots open for someone who would like to be an EME. If anyone is interested in that, they can contact me directly and I'll connect you to the right folks. And then public comment, I'm not sure, I joined the call a little bit late and Joanne was doing her presentation, so I'm not sure if we got to this, but public comment was an item that we are considering adding, you know, since we're basically an open meeting and we fall into those guidelines. And so there is, you know, some verbiage that was listed on the agenda, basically says to provide comments before the meeting, you can contact Joanne and there's an email provided there. And it requires folks to provide their full legal name and the organization that they represent, if any, and that must be received prior to the start of the meeting and that they will be read into the record. That's for folks who want to do that in advance. To comment during the meeting, we're asking that folks raise your virtual hand at this time. During the time allocated for public comment, which we intend to keep at the end of the meeting, and you will be acknowledged to speak. If there are any members of the public, 2-minute per person limit may be applied. Questions on that? That's a, you know, open meeting law thing. And then I think that's it. The next meeting is Tuesday, April 20th at 12 noon.
Mhm.
Is there, if there's nothing else, then I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Rob made motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Then we are adjourned. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much to the staff and for all of the committee members for doing this important work. And I appreciate, you know, the additional structure that's being added so that we can be really purposeful and intentional about what we're doing and how we're connected to the bigger picture. So just keep that in mind and that mindset. And I will see you in a couple of months.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.